Okay, welcome to the virtual roundtable on education programs from the Vermont Historical Society. My name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm the Community Outreach Manager here at VHS. And we had a fun time doing all these roundtables, and this is one of our last ones. And I'm happy today to have Victoria Hughes from VHS with us and Christine Scales from the Billings Farm and Museum. And we are going to talk all about education programs, family programs, and anything else. Happy to have questions as we go, speak up or put something in the group chat. And so I'm going to start by just turning it over to Victoria.
All right, good morning. I will say, so I run the education programs at the Vermont History Museum. And since we've closed, we are losing a good number of our school visits this year, and we really don't know what things are going to look like. We haven't figured that out. We, in some ways aren't going to figure things out until next fall when we start to see the school programs come back. So, there isn't really even a way to talk about, maybe what's next. We're sort of thinking about what we can do and looking at what we have in our space, but, we can't make any decisions at this point. So I'm going to focus on what we normally do and some of the reasons we do what we do, but knowing that a lot of this might change as we go forward, and thinking about ways that we can, make things different while still keeping things safe. So I'm going to share my screen and figure out, this is the one that I want to do. And we'll do the full slideshow. So one thing with the Vermont History Museum is we are pretty well set up for school groups. They make up maybe a third of our audience during the year. And so we do have, wide spaces for the school groups to be in. We have different sort of stage settings for different time periods in history that the school groups can explore. And it's, it's a great exhibit for adults too. But when it was designed, the designers really took into account the school audience as one of our main audiences. And so, we do have open spaces, but they are all indoor spaces at the museum, which is something that we're going to think about going forward. And we, I think, one of the things that is sort of helping us at this point is that we are free for school groups. And so even though it's hard to miss all the schools and their teachers and their parents that usually come this time of year, it's not an impact financially, which I know in other museums it really is a challenge, missing the income from the school groups. We also are free for homeschool families, considering them part of a very small school group, and we do coordinate with the State House next door, and that I think is a driver of a lot of the school visits to Montpelier, is that they can go to the State House and come to the museum. Our main audience is fourth graders because that's when they're learning about Vermont history and Vermont government, but we do see a good number of middle schoolers and some high schoolers, and we do see camp groups throughout the summer. A few years ago, we stopped giving guided tours of the exhibit. Those used to be our main way of taking school groups through. And I know, other places don't have the luxury of doing this. We do have the larger spaces, which can help, with people spreading out, but also, as you might be able to see in the top corner picture, is that we've got the real stuff behind plexi and the fake stuff out where the kids can touch. So, it's not a worry about the safety of collections, which I know in other places, is a concern. You can't just let people walk through the buildings on their own. So we do use a lot of reproduction items where the kids can touch things and balance that with the real collections on display. It's not a free-for-all. We do give the kids focusing questions and some structure as they go through the exhibit. And one of the highlights that we've been working on recently is we have added a lot of interactives and dress-up clothes and things that people touch, and we encourage them to touch, and we want them to touch. And now, thinking, what now? We don't. We keep things clean, but we don't disinfect, the slates after every kid touches the slate pencils. And, we don't, we just can't. So thinking of going forward, do we have them wash their hands when they come into the museum, which, is good, but for kids, it's not going to last throughout the whole exhibit with clean hands. So something to think about. And I know that is something that museums are really looking at is what do we do with the hands-on, and, what do science centers do when all of these things, are built for multiple people to use them and touch them after each other. And, so what do we do next? Sort of in addition to the guided to the self-guided tours, we have added some new guided programs that take place in our classroom space. And really the goal of these was to get, to have programs that are more focused to, so the students explore the whole sort of swath of Vermont history in the museum, but then in the programs, we can focus on a smaller piece. We can use primary sources. They are all inquiry-based programs. It's a way to get our collections materials to the students, and we do charge for these. These are $3 per student, so it is, extra programs, but also, it's something the schools can choose to do, but all schools have the option for a free program. Or a free self-guided visit to the museum. But if they want to do the extra programs, we do charge for those. And these are taught by staff, but also it's our volunteer program at the museum. The volunteers who used to give the guided tours, several of them are now giving the teaching the programs for the supplemental activities. And right now we have 4 options. Mapping Vermont history has been pretty popular, where we look at different maps. And the goal behind that is we make a timeline of maps, or the kids make a timeline of maps. So we figure out how Vermont has changed over time by carefully looking at many different Vermont maps through the years. The program about immigration is popular. A lot of teachers are making connections to that today, talking about immigration in schools, but we do it by looking at Barre in the 1920s and focusing on the Italian immigrants to Barre. And we use the census records. We use, laminated copies of census records, but we use the census records. I always make sure that we have both a copy of the original handwritten materials, even though a lot of the kids can't read them, but we also have the transcriptions, but making sure that the copies of the original materials are there with the kids. But again, these are laminated and we reuse them and pass them out. And for the maps, we use dry erase markers. So, we draw on them and wipe them off, but we don't disinfect them. So, thinking about that going forward. And thinking about, are these ways that we can do these programs remotely? Because it is, we usually do an introduction and the students then break into groups and investigate different materials. But is it something that we can do, from a distance and do across a screen? Because, I have heard the CDC recommendations is that when schools are back in session, they avoid going on field trips, which is tough. So how do we bring field trips to their classrooms? The other 2 programs are looking at Civil War soldier letters, where the kids specifically look at what soldiers have requested from Vermont. So it's, focusing on war, but not on the war, but really the connection to the home front. and then you be the historian. And this is a program we've actually been doing for 20 years, but it's looking at archaeology and artifacts to investigate a farm in the 1880s. And it's not a famous farm family, but it actually is related to some archaeology that the Historical Society did in the 1980s in Calais. And then last thing, that's sort of our big education program for children is our History for Homeschoolers class. We've been doing this for 10 years. It's one of my favorite programs because we do get to see the kids coming back. And a lot of times we get to see the kids coming back year to year. And this is actually the picture from History Day of 2 kids who have graduated from our History for Homeschoolers program, because they do age out of the program, but they have been coming for, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 years. But then they became involved in a different program that we have, so keeping them involved. But it's a monthly program. We do it September to May. We do it in the afternoon, in part because then it doesn't overlap with our school programs, but it also seems to work well for the homeschoolers because they can do their regular work, their at-home work in the morning, and then they come out in the afternoon. One very important thing with this is that it is multi-age. We recommend 6 to 12. I think this year we have like 5 to 13-year-olds in the program, but if it's a homeschool family, they're used to the multi-age, and they can't leave the 5-year-old at home, or they can't leave, the 2-year-old, because we've got little ones running around too. So having a very flexible structure, a lot of times, the activities are, the kids have the option to write or draw. And so down at the bottom, we have this was just submitted for our online History for Homeschoolers program this week, because we can't do it in person, but it's a Venn diagram comparing ice harvesting as seen in the movie Frozen and ice harvesting as seen in a real documentary, what it really looked like. And he did pick up on the fact that they were singing in Frozen, and not so much singing as they harvested ice in the real documentary. But a choice to write or draw, or however the kids want to respond, because there is a lot. Homeschoolers have a different flexible structure because they're not part of the what we see in a lot of classrooms. So just knowing that they're a very different audience, and that we work with them differently to meet their needs. But we focus on Vermont topics. In a large part, this program grew out of we were doing some weekend family programs that just were getting homeschoolers on the weekend, and we figured we might as well do it during their school day. But there's sort of this weird requirement in the Agency of Education guidelines for homeschoolers, is that they focus on Vermont every year, which the public schools don't do that, but the homeschoolers need to do that. And so they are looking for ways to focus on Vermont. And we do charge for this program, it's $8 per student. And we do have a discount for VHS members, but it's a good way to get, reach out to a different audience and really build on an audience that, will come back month to month and come back year to year, which, I wish we could do that with our school groups, but we're just not set up to do it in that way. So at this point, over the years, we've tried different sort of weekend family programs. We aren't running any right now. So really, our education programs for kids are focused on the schools and the homeschoolers. So I'm going to unshare and I think pass it on to Christine.
Excuse me, this is Margot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for not being on video, but it is a total chaos mess here. Nobody needs to see this. But I'm with the Cavendish Historical Society, and we run a program called the Carmen Juca Young Historians Program, where we do a huge amount of hands-on history. We do a lot of trips. And what would be really helpful for me today, and why I joined, and I certainly know about both of the programs that you've offered and what Billings, because you're very close to us. And I really would like to talk about the fall, if we could, because I know for a fact, because I am working with the state, from everything from the Agency of Education to telecommunications, a chunk of this is going to be on Zoom next year. And how can we work together, to take advantage of this new situation to really bring our history out to all of Vermont. So for example, I'm home to Phineas Gage, I'm home to Solzhenitsyn. Happy to do some Zoom programming. And I think if we can coordinate some of this stuff through the Vermont Historical Society, we're going to be really successful. I mean, I know a large part of my budget is actually in children's education, because that's where I get funded. And the way that funding came to me was get them out of Cavendish. So, and I get that, and we do that, and it's now very, very challenging, and I'm coming up with a variety of ways. And I don't know if any of you ever follow Seth Godin's work. If you don't know who Seth Godin is, I highly recommend watching his TED Talk on the future of education. And I think that part of what we're seeing that is working with Zoom education, and we need to have this conversation, is that kids are going and doing the work that the teachers put on the website for them. And then they come back with questions. And this is a different approach than what we've done in the past. Because what, you go to school, you get a lecture, you get a this or that. But now they're finding it's sort of flipping it up. And how do we respond to that? I certainly have a little mailbox now that's going to be outside the museum that'll have little kits they can take out of and do and all of that. But how do we work collectively as a state to reach those gifted and talented kids that aren't getting reached at all? Archaeology, we take the kids out on a dig. They go, we are part of the program at Castleton. Our kids go out. We bring the Native American elders in. Our kids spend a whole day where they learn the flint knap. We have very, very aggressive hands-on programs. But right now we're dead in the water. So, and we're going to be dead in the water until there's a vaccine. So I guess I was really hoping today we could problem solve.
I think that's, something that's definitely on all of our minds. And just to let you all know, we sent out a survey to our teachers who had scheduled a field trip here in the spring that obviously had to be canceled, as well as just a larger list of educators that we had, asking them what they were looking for and how we could best be a resource for them. And we had about 50 responses. And I was actually kind of surprised by the responses, because I thought what they would be looking for would be live programming. You're there as an educator and answering questions and doing something live. And about half of them were interested in that, but all of them were interested in, pre-recorded lessons and activities and things like that. And as I think about it more, it does make sense, maybe for the time being at least, because those things that they can kind of pass on to their students. And maybe it's hard to get everyone together on live right now, but I thought that was a really interesting thing to find out. So we are kind of looking at, just to let you know where we are with this, for the fall, creating some online modules or kits or lesson plans, whatever you want to call them, kind of adapting some of our education programs, and doing a couple of different videos. It's difficult too, because, we get K or even pre-K through, usually 4th or 5th grade. So we might have to do a couple of different kits or supplementary information, just because we don't know what grade of teachers will be using them. So we're kind of looking at that and including in those kits, video and, site place-based video, and then also, worksheets and resources. And I don't know, I mean, we're thinking, for us, our field trips are a part of our revenue. We charge $5 a student, and we are lucky to have a fund for scholarships for schools that need it. So we're also trying to grapple with that, can we charge for these things? Our school's going to have a budget for these things. And then another thought is, are there things that we can bring to the schools, if they aren't ready to come to us, or can't, don't have the budget to come to us? Can we adapt some of our programs so that, an educator is going to them and bringing something authentic and something impactful that they wouldn't necessarily have in their classroom. So that's kind of where we are at with the fall. But yeah, I mean,
I can say, sort of out of necessity, the only, the program that we have done, well, actually are in the middle of doing, is our May History for Homeschoolers, because I moved the April class to June and, sort of hopes that maybe we'll be able to do something. I don't know, because the timeline keeps sort of stretching out further than it originally seemed like it would. And because for the homeschoolers class, we do have a lot of prepaid students, so I didn't want to just cancel it. So we're doing sort of a hybrid, where I sent a lot of the materials that we would have used to the parents. And then with this lesson, it was things like, we're doing a craft activity, which they can do at home. Normally we would do all together, but they can do it at home. So they're going to make puppets of Champ at home. They're going to do some other activities at home. And then we're going to gather together in a Zoom class tomorrow and Thursday, because we have 2 sessions scheduled. But so far, like, not all the kids have signed up for Zoom. Because there are differences of equal access and who has a good internet connection, and I think, and this may be more particular to the homeschool audience, but there are concerns about the kids being on video and not wanting to use that as a primary source of interaction. But I know with schools, there's that same issue of who has access and who doesn't have access. I think one thing that may be different in the fall is that the kids are going to be at school. So it's not going to be the, how do we reach them all at home? It's going to be more the typical classroom setting rather than, right now it's reaching out to kids in different places. And I think that sort of like you said, the videos that they can do an asynchronous activity where they don't all have to be doing the same thing at the same time is working better for now. Mm-hmm. But whether we're going to go towards more a typical, video classroom, that video field trips, different places have been doing those for a while. We've never done those in part because the way we set up our museum was for the kids to explore. And so, I can put on dress up clothes, but it's not the same as the kids doing that. And so, I've been thinking a little bit, could we take a camera in and take pictures of the museum, but it's not that same experience. And I think that's one of the big things is it can't be that same experience, but how do we build new experiences that get the kids involved in history in different ways?
Yeah. And I think too, we're also, thinking about, I think one of the special things about our field trips and your field trips too, Victoria, are, kind of those hands-on experiences and getting to explore and, be in a space and kind of learn through playing and doing. And so how can we do that virtually, which inherently is not a platform that is hands-on necessarily. So, you know, are there kits that we can send to schools so kids can have, you know, everyone can have a little piece of wool, and together we can, you know, do something like that? You know, how can we make it kind of like a hybrid experience?
But
Yeah.
one of the things that you can do, that we can do, so for example, with our first graders, we always talk about old-fashioned games. And one of them is we have them, because this was a big sheep producing, we make the wool balls from roving. Yeah. But it's the kind of thing where we can teach teachers how to do this, and we can supply them with the materials and basically educate the educators is certainly something, because a lot of times I feel like when I go in, the teachers are just real happy to have me do this.
Yeah.
Now, more is being required of them, but we can supply them with the materials. The advantage I have that you all don't have is I have a budget. I don't charge at all for my programming. So that puts me in a very, very different position. And I also have, you know, there's town history, so I can do map quests and I Spies and for kids and families and have them post, and I can do all of that, which is really fun. But I think the more maybe we could try to work through the Historical Society, really capitalizing. So for example, I really know Phineas Gage, and a lot of places are really interested in Phineas Gage because he's weird and he's scary and he's fun and he's a skull and he's a brain. But why not say, let's do these programming through the Historical Society, but open them up in a broader way? I mean, can we think about having, through the Vermont Historical Society, can we start a history club that's statewide so that we start bringing kids in? Because one of the things that I'm concerned about is that there are these exceptionally really gifted and talented kids in our schools that sort of get overlooked, and they do get excited when I come in to work with them in programming because they get to shine in a really different way. And I just wonder how many kids around the state. Are there things that we can do statewide? So, you know, I have some areas of expertise. Billings obviously does. Wouldn't it be cool to have the new elders, all four of the elders, for October, instead of doing whatever? Why not have all four of the new elders be available for a really neat Zoom day? You know, I mean, can we think about things like that, or does that not make sense, or is the funding too much of an issue?
I do, you know, it is tricky with the coordination, and we find this, you know, even working with the State House, and we coordinate our physical field trips with the State House, you know, that it is the logistics of different school schedules and different, you know, classroom schedules that, you know, is something that could be worked out, but it just, you know, is the kind of thing. I do know that the Agency of Education for a while was working to coordinate virtual field trips, and using I forget what it's called, but the statewide system of, that they used to have the classrooms where you could go do the videos. But I think that's, you know, gonna fall out because, you know, now more people have video cameras in their computers, so you don't need to go to the distance learning rooms, whatever that was,
right,
whatever program that was. But a couple of years ago, you know, they were pushing that and trying to, you know, get some funding and coordinate some virtual field trips, but a lot of them were to outside of the state, because Vermont museums weren't doing virtual field trips. I'm not sure, Eileen, you sent it around, but I didn't look a whole lot at it, but the science centers that are working together. So Monshire and Echo, Fairbanks, and Binns, was that? Yeah, so I'm not, you know, if there's something that we can sort of do similar, as history organizations, similar to what the science organizations are doing.
Yeah, it was called For Science Vermont or something like that.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's sort of that collaborative idea. Right now I think it's more, sort of talking about what they've already got set up as a whole. But it sounds like the plan is to work towards more programs that are sort of done together or coordinated together in the long run. So I do think that that's an interesting model. I think the big difference is that's for institutions. And, when we start talking history in the state, obviously there's a lot of local societies and not all of them are doing, field trips and school programs, but a lot are doing something. And so how do we, again, I think, right, that's that challenge of how to find a model for being able to collaborate and coordinate, but understanding that different organizations are at different levels. And how do we ensure that both people can participate and that, again, the participation is sort of evenly managed in some fashion.
Yeah, I will say one of the kind of, I guess, maybe exciting silver linings of this that we're starting to think about is how our content and our, stories can reach beyond the normal audiences that come to visit, beyond the homes or the homeschool and the school groups who usually come, just limitations of travel time and that sort of thing. But for us especially, these lessons of self-sufficiency and of working land and victory gardens are huge right now, and like we have a victory garden, we have a learning kitchen, so we're kind of thinking about how we can actually maybe extend our reach to schools or groups who are in cities and don't necessarily have the ability to come visit a farm or a rural, have that kind of experience. So we are kind of thinking about that, and I think a lot of actually these stories and the history that we have here in Vermont has these broad reaching applications, and like Phineas Gage, it's cool, like you said, it's cool, people are interested in it, and we might have the opportunity to partner with other people who we wouldn't always have the opportunity to partner with. Maybe there's like a psychology professor at a university or something who could contribute to that education module or information. And
we can get the Harvard Museum, we work with them.
Oh, great.
And they can see the tamping rod, they can see the skull, they can get a lecture on how it passed through. I mean, it would be really fun to kind of bring them together. I mean, the advantage of when they come to Vermont, if they come to Cavendish, you actually walk the route out to where how he would have walked out in the morning and how he would have come back in a cart. And there is something in that walking that gives you a sense of distance and time. So, I'm in a little different position, but again, that's something we can do in terms of Solzhenitsyn. I work very, very closely with Solzhenitsyn's family. And again, we can bring, Ignat and I go in and do a whole program for the 6th graders. Now, we offered to do that this year, and because we have the biography for children, and the teachers were too overwhelmed to take advantage of it. And I think we're all seeing that. So I haven't really pushed anything. I'm really figuring we're not going to be able to open this summer because I can't guarantee that I can meet the state guidelines as they start coming out. So I'm not sure I can do that, particularly because I have to rely on volunteers. And there's no way I can guarantee that. So I'm looking more and more what kind of things that I can put in my my museum to go, my hands-on history to go. That's kind of the stuff that I'm thinking more and more, and I'm collaborating with the library and trying to think of all of these ways. But I do know what's coming in the fall, and normally when we would be taking our kids everywhere from Sturbridge Village to being out on an archaeological dig, we're not going to have any of that. And it's not the same. It's not the same to see flint knapping as to actually Our kids each get to make their own tool. They make big flakes, and then we have them pressure flake, and they make a tool. We can't do any of that. I don't think we're going to be able to do any of that. I mean, is anybody talking to Agency of Education? I just know they want to see more schools working together, and you know, I don't even think they really know, but I know that's coming down the pike.
Yeah, I think, you know, they're trying to figure it out, and there wasn't time this spring. And I know, you know, they were definitely, schools are working on the continuation of learning plan, or the continuity of learning plan. But I think it was just so fast. You know, so I do think that is one advantage, is that we do have this summer to sort of look ahead to see, you know, what might work. We have our history kits that we haven't been shipping out, but now we're going to start doing that again, now that there is some guidance for libraries of, you know, how they send materials into people's houses and then get them back. You know, so having rest time between, you know, going to different places. You know, and certainly, you know, we've sent a lot of the kids to Cavendish Town School over the years, because there's some great teachers there who are really active and really involved, and want that hands-on experience for the kids. And I think that's, you know, that's going to be the hard part, is how do we replicate that, you know, and I you know, not knowing what it's going to be like in the fall. Like, schools were already getting tighter just in general with having non-staff and volunteers going into the schools. And so will this, you know, lock it down even tighter, that it's only the teachers and the kids that are allowed in the schools? So, you know, can we even go into schools and present materials, or does it all have to be through the teachers? And, you know, are they still feeling overwhelmed? Because I think a lot of this spring, like, they're trying to figure it out and do the best they can, but it's hard on them too to make this switch, you know, from all their years of what they've planned.
Right. And what's really interesting is that, I don't know if anyone has children at home, but when it first started, the parents absolutely hated it. It was just a nightmare. But as time has gone on and they've put more information online that families can download and do, and then they meet, more and more families are telling me that, and these were some of the families that really hated it at the beginning, they actually prefer it to school. And that to me is, I found that really fascinating, that there has been a real shift. There are parents that are really saying, maybe we should homeschool our kids next year and do it by Zoom. So that's just making me think, well, gee, if this is what's seeming to work with families and kids, you know, how do we build on this? And as I said, you've got to figure out how to make this pay. And that's not my issue. So I am fortunate that I get just to think about programming, but you've got to think about funding and what you can literally get funded to do. And we know they've already talked about cutting our school's budget, the supervisory union budget, that we have passed at town meeting, probably 15 to 20%, to be more in line. And we already know the classes are going to be staggered, that the little kids are probably going to come at one time, the bigger kids at another time. It's going to be an interesting year, and it's going to be like this for a while. Yeah. I mean, I keep on thinking, you have dress ups, send a box of dress ups. I mean, come on, how fun is that?
Yeah.
You know, work with the local historical societies, see what they have for dress ups. Do a combined program, because most of us have closets full of clothes, and to see, you know, that can easily be worked out. I mean, whenever we take the kids like to the Shaker Village or anything, they all want to do the dress ups. They all want to be, you know, whatever. that stuff it's pretty simple to run that stuff up on a machine. That the more we start planning for it in the summer, the better we're able to help them in the fall.
Mhm.
Oh, and I wanted to mention to you, you talked about how the homeschoolers, because I do work a lot with homeschoolers,
Mhm.
that they don't do European history or any other history. We do all history, and we just, so for example, when it comes to St. Patrick's Day, we talk about the influence of the Irish on Vermont, but a larger part of the experience is exploring Irish culture. And whether they make a ring that's an Irish ring because they were amazing coppersmiths and so forth, or they learn how to make a Celtic knot or whatever. It's very hands-on, obviously, but there is people have come all over the world. So I feel like you've got free reign to teach anything you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be Vermont.
Yeah, well, and it's not that they don't do other history, but it's that there's a place that they have to check off that they've done something with Vermont history, government, or culture every year, which is a different requirement than what the public schools do when they sort of lump most of their Vermont history and government into 3rd and 4th grade and then don't necessarily circle back to it. So it's sort of an odd disconnect. But I know that, the homeschoolers are doing a lot of different history and following different passions. And I
Really
do.
weird that they completely changed history in our area. We're not on the same side. Okay.
Yeah, I know that got Cavendish flipped their curriculum for
It's been a real challenge because I had to completely and it's not just, I think it's the whole Green Mountain Unified School District. Yeah, are they the only school district on that schedule?
I think they're one of the only ones.
Thank you, Jen Harper. She doesn't realize she did that, but whatever.
I know, yeah, I've worked with Jen a lot over the years, and we were trying to, and that is like, they came up and did the immigration program last year, because even though they used to do a lot of Vermont history and they weren't, specifically focusing on Vermont, they were talking about immigration. And so, I think that is one way that, these different programs can reach different ages and different groups by having, like having that bigger theme. So like Christine said, that sustainability and that, perseverance, how can we have bigger themes where our examples are Vermont, but, like Phineas Gage, it's a Vermont story, but it's not, there's so much more that can be related to him and the discoveries and all the scientific information, which I think, can reach way beyond Vermont boundaries.
Yeah, and literally ideal from people from South America, all over the world. People from Germany have come, and it's depending on the school and the age, we teach it very differently. But people come here for 3 reasons. They come from Gage or Solzhenitsyn, or they're looking for their own town history. And yet we have many more stories to tell, which we do want our kids. The other piece of this is that we really teach stewardship. That's, they clean the cemetery, they scrub the gravestones. They really, and I can do some of that, even though graves are not necessarily 6 feet apart, 6 feet under maybe, but I can spread them out and they can do some of that. So we can still do some of that with social distancing, provided how we bring them and how we do that. That's still a possibility for us. And I have to tell you, since we started doing the grave program, we don't have any vandalism in our graves. And we don't have vandalism the way other towns do, because they have to do river sweep where they clean up the river. They clean the gravestones, literally get on their hands and knees and scrub them. And they help out in other ways. They do community service throughout the town. And so our town's a cleaner town as a result. But stewardship is huge. And my heart goes out to you guys, because I feel like after listening to you, I don't have any problems. I just have to be creative in my programming. because I do have the funding for now. May not last, we know that. But I also think the more we can collaborate and offer our programming through the Historical Society, Vermont's Historical Society, then it's a richer history for all. Like, you know, my kids have all met the chief of the LNO here in our area, but how neat for them to meet all of the chiefs. You know, these types of things. And I think that lends itself as something, not so much me doing it for just a small group of kids, but how do we take our resources so that the whole state benefits? So.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the reasons that people go to museums and go to historical societies is that they crave that, you know, authentic experience and, you know, being in that place. And it's difficult with the virtual aspect of it, you know, that's pretty much removed. So, I mean, as much as we can, we're trying to keep what is safe to keep with that authentic experience. Like Margot, like you said, you know, maybe they can clean the cemeteries and just be 6 feet apart, and you know, maybe they can, you know, make flint tools. Maybe there's a way that that can happen. Just try and keep as much of that as possible, rather than switch everything over to digital and everything over to virtual. I mean, that's my opinion of what I think will be most impactful.
And you know what would be really helpful is if we're developing kits and we're developing things, that we can all share that information. Like, I know our 6th grade teacher did an old-fashioned hoop and ball game using a stick and whatever, and she put it online and it was really fun. But I think if we're going to make up kits and we're working with our libraries, the more we can share, oh, we're going to do like a thing on Native Americans. I mean, I happen to have a lot of stone that I can make a kit so each child can see what flint is made, you know, how I can do that. But again, how can we share that? And so maybe that's why I keep on looking to the Historical Society, which I do realize that you guys are, you know, you've got your own level of compromising here. Does the state Agency of Education give any funding to the Vermont Historical Society? No.
No, well, and I have some friends at the Agency of Education, and I know they're sort of strapped for what they need to do anyway. And I, you know, one thing that sort of surprises me, but it's sort of the way it is, you know, we are constantly reconstructing our contact list for teachers, because every time, you know, the districts merge, that changes the teachers' emails addresses. And so, you know, even if like the Agency of Education could provide a contact list for all the teachers in the state, that would make life so much easier. But they don't even have a contact list for all the teachers in the state. And probably the only people that do is the Vermont NEA, and you know, that's for different purposes, and they're not going to share that, and I understand that. But
Do they have a listserv?
There is I know there's a social studies listserv through the Agency of Education that comes out sort of occasionally. There is the weekly field memo that goes to sort of superintendents and principals, and that is something that I do use to send information to, because anybody can sign up for the weekly field memo from the Agency of Education, but I don't think it doesn't necessarily go to all the teachers, but that is one way that the Agency of Education puts out information. And there is a homeschool listserv through the Agency of Education, so I have used that to reach out to people. But, you know, that's sort of 3 different listservs from the agency, and they don't necessarily coordinate. And it's sort of hit or miss as to who is on the receiving end of that.
And if they read it.
Yeah, that's true. And I know these days, like now that everything is through email, just how overwhelming that can be. Of, you know, like the first week it was great hearing about webinars and resources, and now I'm like, okay, I can't read another email about resources. You know, so I can be missing some. So yeah, so that, you know, that Vermont spirit of independence and local control is great in a lot of ways, but it is, you know, does make it hard to reach statewide, because the Agency of Education doesn't have that sort of, you know, they can't get to every school, I think, like other states can do in the same way.
Yeah, so getting close to 11 right now, which these aren't necessarily set, but we like to do them about an hour. I don't know, Christine, if you had anything else you wanted to share from Billings specifically.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about our junior farmer camp, which is our day camp that we are hoping to still have this summer, just with some of the guidance that we have gotten from the governor in the past week. It's a pretty small camp anyways, so we are hoping to still have that maybe with 10 kids or 8 kids, kind of depending on staffing. But I mean, I think I've seen a lot of museums do day camps recently, and I think that's a really interesting avenue. So I was just going to talk a little bit about that, and it's been really popular. This is about our 3rd year doing it, and it's really hands-on. So the kids are with the animals, they're making food, they put on a show at the end of the week for their families where they make a little poster all about their animal, and they interview the farmers, and they do research and kind of share out. And like I said, we've had really great success with those day camps, and I think that's kind of an interesting avenue as well. And it might be a good way for us to test some things this summer as far as education. And yeah, I mean, echoing some of the things Victoria said, school groups are a big part of our visitation. We get about 60,000 visitors a year, and about 5,000 of those are school groups. And with the pandemic, we have lost all of our spring field trips, which is sad for a lot of reasons. And who knows about the fall. So we are trying to think about that. And a lot of our programs are very hands-on, and, you know, some of them involve food and eating things. So we're trying to figure out that as well. And we have some really immersive programs like our Day in 1890 program, where students come into our 1890 farmhouse and spend a day back, basically the travel back in time. And that's the only time we do first person interpretation. So they go do chores in the barn, they do laundry, they sew, they help make a meal on our cook stove, and then we all sit down together and eat our meal. So I don't know what that's going to look like, or if we're going to be able to do that this year. But that is a really successful program that has been running at Billings for a long time. And then, yeah, we are also starting to work more with homeschool families. I mean, Victoria does is like legendary around the state. I hear all the homeschool families say, oh, they do such a great job, which is awesome. And in talking with the homeschool families, some of the things that I've learned are that in our area, at least, science is like pretty much covered because there's, you know, Montshire and Vins, and they do really great homeschool programming. But history is something that the homeschool families are really looking for in our area. And actually art, we did art on the farm and had an artist in residence who was doing homeschool art classes, and those were also really well received. So it's been interesting to talk with those families and learn what they're looking for, and kind of try some new things through that avenue. And yeah, as far as family programs, we have, you know, all our theme days, all of our, you know, our time travel Tuesday, our wagon ride Wednesday, our Thursday threads, and our foodie Fridays. We don't have anything on Monday. We decided to take a break, but we see a lot of families, and I always tell our interpreters, one of the things that I think is really special about museums and about cultural institutions and historical societies is it's a place where families can come together and can make connections. And you think about what places are out there that do that and lend themselves really well to that. And, I think, go to the movies, where you kind of sit and don't talk with each other. You go shopping maybe, but museums and gardens and historical societies, I think, are so special because these generations can come together and can learn from each other and talk to each other and have this experience together. So for family programs, we have some programs that are, like our preschool story hour that, encourage families. But our general visitation and those days, I think, are where most families come and connect with each other.
Yeah, and I think, some of the things are going to be and this is where I think some of the funding comes into the equation long term. What's the short term response going to have to be? What are we going to have to do this summer and the fall?
Mm-hmm. What's
next year going to look like? Are there going to be changes? New York is talking about, we don't need classrooms anymore. We can all go digital. I know. Are there long-term educational changes or these things go? And I do think also that question of the classroom education and then what they're looking for from both an educational and engagement standpoint. That's going to be really interesting to see sort of how that evolves and if there are permanent changes or if we all are missing so much of this that when we can, everybody goes back to doing the same exact stuff they did.
Right.
And likely to go visit and more likely to go to a museum and more likely to want to do these things where they can engage and interact and do stuff together. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of what is missing from these virtual school classrooms, et cetera, is that social aspect. A lot of kids miss their friends, they miss seeing them every day and learning and growing. I mean, it's such an important part of school and education is just learning the social aspects of being with other people. So, I mean, it's something to keep in mind when we are planning our programs moving forward.
Yeah, I did a couple weeks ago, the Arts Council set up a Zoom session with the state epidemiologist. And I did appreciate hearing her say that we can't stop touching things that other people have touched, that we're being safe, we're being careful now, but there is no way that, somebody touched that library book before you did. And that just is the way it is. And so, thinking about, do we have a lot more signs that say wash your hands and do we have hand sanitizer in different places? But, I have heard of other places where they're putting away everything, putting away all the interactives, putting away things that people might touch. But then, that cuts down that authentic experience and it cuts down on that ability to share things with each other. So I think those are some of the things that we're going to grapple with is we want to be safe, we want to be authentic, we want to, and also just the logistical of, we can't spray down the museum after every person has left. And people do need to be responsible for themselves, but also, how do we make it welcoming and how do we make people feel safe and secure so that either visitors come as a family or parents feel okay sending their kids to these places, to our places, and how do we do that? And I think, we can look for guidance, but it's hard to make decisions yet.
Yeah, and I think, again, what I loved sort of Margot about some of your framework, and I think that's what's going to be the ongoing discussion is how can we, do some collaboration, do some sharing, collating information. I think that's it is the question, and I think it's something that's a great idea to do. And right, I think we'll all just sort of have to figure out how can we do that, and go from there. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts before we sort of wrap up?
I just was going to mention that one of the things I'm doing is really focusing on preparing history to go. That's what I'm calling it, which anybody else is welcome to it. But the whole idea is, how do I get it so people can either stop by the museum or the library, pick something up, get a kit? What kind of kits would be cool? Like I thought about 1930s, because we're now sort of coming into a recession. What happened in the 1930s? What did kids do in the 1930s? Well, they did paper dolls, and and these are all things that I can make up little kits, and people can just come, and I'm having somebody make me like a mini museum, like a mini library. I'm making a mini history, a mini museum that's to go. Does that make sense? And that you literally open the door and you take out a slot there's a slot for kids, slot for walks, slot for, but I think the more, I would love to hear what other people are trying around that, but I think the more that we can share how we're going to do history to go, as well as, Zooming history, like I know for Constitution Day, I want to do a Constitution trivia night. And I had planned to do this with our 5th graders. We were going to do it at our local restaurant. We were going to have, like a bar, but they have food. It's not what it sounds like. But we were going to do trivia night. It was all going to be on the Constitution. And we'd have a special category for Vermont Constitution, which they would not be expecting. But so how do we do those things? And how do we how many people are taking part in the Vermont trivia history nights, and are they, who are they? Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think average probably like 45, 50 people a week that are doing those. And Amanda's got a good system now where people use Kahoot, which is a school-based sort of multiple choice question answering system. So, it's certainly something the kids are used to, but all kinds of people are using that. And so that has certainly, more people than we saw at trivia when we were doing it in a bar, just because of, a lot of the capacity issue. But it is, I don't know that we have quite good demographics on who they are. There's some that are, coming back every week, and some that are sort of actively participating, some that are passively watching, but not necessarily doing the answering part. And that is something that has been a good way to turn a program that we've done before in person to reach people further out.
And Margot, we actually did curbside craft pickup 3 times we got in before the stay-at-home order went into effect. Yeah. So we did something similar to your history to go that you're talking about, and kind of included a kit that had a craft and an activity along with educational content. So like one that we did was a bean buddy, and it had a little bag, and you put your bean in there with your water, and it was a little necklace that you could wear. And then also a worksheet that's, draw your bean every X number of days. And those were really popular. We made 50 bags, and I was like, we'll see what happens. And then we frantically had to make 70 more. So those people, I think, really enjoy that and enjoy having something tangible. Especially when you think about trying to cut down on screen time. I know I am trying to cut down on my screen time, and I know a lot of parents are trying to cut down on their kids' screen times as well. So I think that's a really good and interesting avenue.
Yeah, and I've heard suggestions, that one of the things that is going to help the parents who are homeschooling by default now, and I think helping teachers too, are things that are independent, so that they're not necessarily adult led. So things that the kids can do by themselves or with little intervention is preferable in a lot of ways. I know that doesn't always give the structure that we would like to have, but that the more independent the kids can do these activities, the more widely they can be used.
Mm-hmm. So I really liked, Christine, your comments about the kids. So I think the more we can, certainly working with a local historical society, sharing what you put in your kit, how you did it, the more likely it is that we can then get, I'd be happy to make a kit like that and provide that for whatever class wants it, and it can go home. But, I'm just one person and I can use all the ideas I can get. So that's why things like this are really good. And I'm sorry not more local little museums are part of this, but the more we can share that so that everybody knows how to make these kits, the more likely we will get history into kids' hands and into adults' hands, because the parents are learning along with the kids. So that's a good thing too. But I like that. So I'm really open to hearing of all of the things people are trying. And I think we can ask local historical societies, whether they are just totally dead in the water for the winter, to really help and step it up a notch for their schools, because the schools all have these things where the bus goes around and drops things off every day. Perfect way. I mean, we can certainly do that.
Yeah. And Margot, if it's helpful to you, our website has a Billings Farm at Home, and they have the kits. You may have to scroll down a little bit because it was back in March, but they have the content that was in the kits. So you can look at that. Feel free to adapt and use whatever you would like. Sure.
I just think the more that we have a one-stop shop, which maybe the Historical Society could do, I don't want to put any pressure, just the better, because, I don't want to have to look at how many historical societies do we have in the state, or science centers, or, Billings. And if there was a one-stop shop where we had all these great ideas together, I'd love it. It would save me some time.
Yeah, and
it would be helpful for you.
Margot, I just did up sort of a little bit more starting on resource pages for local societies. These are more about, sort of links to templates or articles or information about, local historical society management and collections and stuff. But it certainly could be some place where we could, if there's enough folks to sort of get that kind of information sharing about their programs and templates and ways in which that we can share very specific examples. I think, again, that's sort of it is a possibility, and I think it's just starting to get the word out and then seeing what we can put together. But I know from my end, from the local society standpoint, I'm happy to provide a web page where we can all start, sending in information and collating these kind of more practical solutions to some of the stuff we're going through. If that's what people are looking for and what people want to share, then I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, because I do think, we are all trying to figure this out and figure out what works. And I remember early on, St. Albans Museum posted something. I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. But we also don't need to reinvent the wheel. And we, if St. Albans Museum is doing it, like, we don't need to do it, but because it's already out there. And it was creating kids creating their museum, their own museum in their houses, or an exhibit. But yeah, like I think we're all trying to figure it out, and just still the sort of the unprecedented quickness of all of this was hard, where we do usually plan things ahead of time and, try and figure out what we're doing. And all of a sudden, everything we had planned for the spring is needing to be switched. And so I think, we'll definitely be quieter than we ever are summer. So I think it will help to have some time. I hope we're going to reopen at some point, but we certainly won't be at our normal capacity. So taking some time to help figure out what things will look like next fall and going forward will be good.
Do you think you'll open this summer? I mean, Billings is a farm, so you can actually kind of control that, I would think. I know right now we're doing our plant sale on the 30th, and normally the museum would be open and all that, and we won't open the museum that day at all. And we're going to follow the farmers market guidelines for how we do the plant sale, and we're actually doing a lot of deliveries this year. I mean, as you said, we're inventing this as we go, but that has been how many visitors are we going to have this summer? And you know, a lot of the visitors that we have from our museum are from people from other countries, because they come for Solzhenitsyn or they come for Phineas Gage, and you know, can I meet them outside the museum? I just, boy, a lot of questions.
Yeah. I know the American Alliance of Museums is collecting reopening plans, and some of them are for like really big sites. So, you know, they might not apply for us as much, but it is interesting to see what other places are doing. We are hoping to reopen in June, maybe, hopefully. We're pretty lucky, like you said, that we have all the outside space that we have. But, you know, some of our buildings, you know, the barns might be closed, the farmhouse might be closed. We're not totally sure yet what that will look like. So I know I wish there was just like an answer that I could give everyone. But I guess it is nice to know that everyone is kind of going through this and thinking through this, and we can kind of look to what other places are doing in that.
You know, one of the questions I have, you know, talking about dress ups and so forth, we know the 1918 pandemic, every kid had to wear a mask. And we've certainly made our masks for our kids for school, and we know that they're going to lose them and they're going to need them all next year. And so we need multiples. I mean, I just wonder, is there somewhere where there was a pattern? How did those masks get made? You know, and wouldn't that be a fun project that somehow or other we could do with school kids all over the state, that we're making a 1918 mask the way that the kids had to wear them? You know, wouldn't that be a cool message? Maybe they'd even wear it.
Yeah.
You know, the elastic stuff doesn't work behind my ears, so I've been actually making them out of ties. They work much better and your glasses don't fall, in case anybody wants to know.
Good to know.
Take the bottom one and tie it up. Oh, you can't see me, but take your bottom strap, the one by your chin, and tie that up more toward the top of the head, and that really seals it off and your glasses won't fall. That's important for us that have to wear glasses.
I know.
Awesome. All right. So this has been great and some good discussion.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we'll sort of see as we keep going. I'm happy to have more discussions as we go, and again, hopefully get some other folks involved. And yeah, I think we'll see where we're at, like in a couple months in the fall, and where education programs go, and what we can do with it. So I'm gonna say thank you to Victoria and Christine for sort of being our folks today, and Margot obviously for joining us. It's been fantastic. And so everybody, unless there's anything else that anybody wants to quick mention, I'm gonna say everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Safe.
You too.